Hey guys, it's so good to see you all. Today, we'll be taking a trip to Nostalgia Town. If you were a cartoon kid in the 80s or 90s, there's a very big possibility that your entire persona was shaped by screaming theme songs. So today, we're going back to that era where a simple toy commercial accidentally became peak science fiction. We're talking about cool space cops, mutated turtles who are also pizza-loving ninjas, some trauma-inducing robot wars, and some of the most unhinged villains ever animated. By the time we're done, you might just realize that the cartoons you grew up with were doing much heavier storytelling than whatever your favorite show is today. So grab your metaphorical cereal bowl, get comfy on that imaginary living room carpet, and let's dive into the sci-fi cartoons that quietly rewired our brains forever.
What's happening?
Transformers, 1984 to 1987. We obviously had to start off with the big boys of the 80s, or rather, should I say, big bots of the 80s? Sorry about the bad joke there. So before Michael Bay trademarked explosions, and long before Optimus Prime became a meme machine on the internet, there was the original The Transformers cartoon. And this thing had absolutely no business going as hard as it did for what was technically a toy commercial. I'm not kidding. The premise was simple but genius if you ask me. We have our two factions of alien robots from the fictional world of Cybertron. In one corner, we have our favorites, the Autobots, and in the other, we have the evil Decepticons. Boo! These factions crash land on Earth and continue their war while humanity gets caught in the middle. Optimus Prime became the gold standard for cartoon leaders, while Megatron was basically every 80s kid's introduction to the concept of a power-hungry sci-fi dictator. If you're thinking, all this is fine, but what actually made Transformers stand out? Well, it's hard to exactly pinpoint one definite thing. Was it the sheer scale of its world building? Well, obviously, this is one of the main reasons. I mean, the series basically had everything you could ask for. I'm talking about fantastic immersive lore, pretty cool factions, and surprisingly emotional character arcs. I mean, in 1986, the animated movie came along, which kinda traumatized an entire generation by killing Optimus Prime right in front of kids, who probably thought cartoons were supposed to be safe. Seriously, parents were definitely not prepared for the amount of crying happening in living rooms that year. Today, sure, the animation can look rough sometimes, depending on which episode you're watching, but at the time, the ambition was massive, and more importantly, honest. Sure, it was built around a toy line, but the storytelling often felt bigger than a simple product push, and that's why kids actually bought into the universe. Even the side characters had serious motivations and a ton of memorable moments, and the legacy never stopped. Transformers evolved into one of the biggest sci-fi franchises on the planet. From Beast Wars to Prime to billion-dollar live-action films, the Autobots and Decepticons are still going strong over 4 decades later. Not bad for a line of toys that turned into an accidental sci-fi empire, right? Voltron, Defender of the Universe, 1984 to 1985. If you grew up in the 80s like myself, there's a very high chance your brain permanently released dopamine and other amazing hormones every time those robotic lions combined into Voltron, Defender of the Universe. If your answer is yes, then that is the correct answer, my friend, because Voltron was awesome. The premise of this show was pretty simple if you ask me, guys. I mean, what is simpler than 5 space pilots who are trying to defend their galaxy from people whose names sound like pure evil? Yeah, I mean, what kind of name is King Zarkon? And let's not forget about Hagar, the evil witch. So these space pilots use their gigantic robotic lions that merge together to form Voltron. Voltron was like a super metal giant robot who also carried what might be the most satisfying giant-sized sword in cartoon history. And it has a pretty badass name as well, the Blazing Sword! What many people didn't realize back then was that the Lion Force version of Voltron was adapted from the Japanese anime Beast King Go Lion, while the broader original Voltron package also pulled from other Japanese material like Armored Fleet Dairugger 15. And you can absolutely feel the anime DNA throughout the show. You know what I'm talking about. The action felt as Jumbo can get, the stakes felt more serious, and of course, the serialized storytelling made it feel far more epic than a lot of Western cartoons airing at the time. Also, the formula was ridiculously influential, especially for kids. The entire team of pilots combining machines into one mega robot thing basically became one of those visual fantasies that kids instantly understood. Power Rangers didn't come from Voltron, obviously, but for Western kids, Voltron helped make the whole team pilots combine into one giant robot fantasy feel absolutely legendary. Hey, don't come at me, Power Rangers fans, it's the truth. But I feel, beyond the robot fights, Voltron nailed one very important thing, and that is scale. The universe actually felt, let's just say galactic. pun intended, and there was always a sense of genuine danger. It made us kids feel like we were watching a massive sci-fi saga like Dune or Star Wars. And decades later, the franchise still survived. Netflix's Voltron Legendary Defender proved that the concept still works when handled properly. Turns out, giant combining space robots never really went out of style. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, 1987 to 1996. Okay, technically Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles sounds like somebody generated random words out of a hat. Teenage, Mutant, Ninja, Turtles. And when you combine these four pretty random words, you get one of the biggest entertainment franchises on Earth. The cartoon followed four mutated turtles, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael, trained in ninjutsu by a giant sewer rat called Master Splinter, as they battled crazy villains like Shredder, Krang, Bebop, Rocksteady, and an endless parade of bizarre sci-fi threats coming straight out of Dimension X. If you're a casual fan, then you must realize that TMNT wasn't just a kid's show about martial arts and goofy pizza jokes. This show was absolutely packed to the brim with sci-fi concepts. I'm talking about the mutagen ooze, alien dimensions, giant brains inside android bodies, bizarre mutations, robot armies, and much, much more. It was basically cosmic insanity wrapped in neon green packaging. The show was funny and ridiculously marketable. The toys sold like crazy, the catchphrases became iconic, and suddenly the turtles were everywhere. Lunchboxes, backs of cereal boxes, arcade games, even sleeping pajamas. You genuinely could not escape Turtle Mania in the early 90s. And despite the goofy tone, the franchise had staying power, because the characters themselves were just incredibly likable. Every turtle had a distinct personality, which meant everybody had their favorite turtle. Mine was Michelangelo. Also, can we appreciate how completely insane Krang was as a villain? A screaming alien brain living inside a robot body while hanging out inside a giant rolling fortress called the Technodrome can be viewed as either peak sci-fi nonsense or absolute cinema. Nothing in between. Even today, TMNT refuses to die. Every generation gets its own version, and somehow the formula still works. And my guess is, it'll work forever. Robotech, 1985. Now this was the cartoon that made a lot of kids realize that even animation could tell mature sci-fi themed stories. Robotech treated war like war. Even after being adapted for American television, Robotech still felt far more mature than most kids' cartoons around it. The series begins after humanity discovers a crashed alien spacecraft on Earth. And guess what they think of doing? Yep, that's right. They rebuild it into this massive warship and stamp it with a cool name, the Super Dimensional Fortress, or SDF-1. However, repairing alien technology comes at a cost, obviously. It paints a giant target on humanity's back, as the Zentradi arrive, which kicks off an intergalactic war that spans generations. I knew rebuilding that spacecraft was a bad idea. The thing about Robotech that made it feel unique from almost every other cartoon at the time was the continuation of the story. This meant every action had a permanent consequence, and we see entire cities being destroyed and some major characters suffering serious trauma. Even some stories that ended heartbreakingly. And the Macross saga was just a piece of sci-fi storytelling at its best. That love triangle between Rick Hunter, Lisa Hayes, and Min-Mei, oh my god, I think it gave the show a much-needed emotional core, something which most cartoons wouldn't even attempt. Another thing which excited me the most was the unpredictable nature of the show's tone. I mean, one episode could have giant mech warfare going on, and the next could suddenly become deeply tragic. The fact that you never know what to expect was kinda its USP. Coming to the animation, Robotech was famously built from 3 Japanese anime series: Super Dimension Fortress Macross, Super Dimension Cavalry Southern Cross, and Genesis Climber Mospeada. That also gave Robotech a more sophisticated look than most American cartoons in the mid-80s. For starters, the mech combat had a certain eye-catching style, and the alien designs felt genuinely intimidating. And that's exactly how Robotech ended up becoming the gateway anime for an entire generation in the West. Many sci-fi writers and animators still go back to this show, as the moment they realized cartoons could also be used as the ground for serious storytelling. Exo Squad, 1993 to 1994. Next up, we have a show that honestly deserved way more attention than it got, if you ask me. I feel that Exo Squad might just be one of the most underrated sci-fi cartoons of the entire 90s, and definitely one of the most underrated shows on our list today. And if you've never watched it, I envy you. The premise is set in a future where humanity has colonized planets with the help of genetically engineered workers called Neo-Sapiens. No points for guessing that the humans treated them horribly, because apparently, mankind cannot go 5 minutes in sci-fi without creating slavery somehow. Sheesh. Eventually, and pretty obviously, the Neo-Sapiens rebel, and suddenly the solar system is thrown into a brutal interplanetary war. Humanity fights back in order to survive, using huge powered exoskeleton suits called E-frames. Now, on paper, this might sound like another cool mech cartoon trying to sell toys, right? But Exo Squad went much darker than that. The show tackled mature topics like racism, genocide, propaganda, political corruption, and even PTSD years before serialized storytelling became normal in Western animation. Like, there are episodes that feel more like Battlestar Galactica than a Saturday morning cartoon. Sounds absolutely bonkers, right? I personally loved that the writers respected the audience enough to let bad things happen. Yes, heroes lost battles, innocent people died, and the villains were not always cartoonishly evil either. Some of them actually believed they were fighting for freedom. The moral grayness made the entire conflict seem disturbingly real. Also, the mech designs were so damn cool. The E-frames looked heavy, industrial, and practical instead of flashy superhero armor. No dig at you, Iron Man, I love you. Exo Squad is basically sacred territory among hardcore sci-fi animation fans, but the show never got the mainstream success it deserved. Sadly, it remains one of those how the hell was this made for kids type of shows, and we're still trying to figure that out after 30 years. Gargoyles, 1994 to 1997. I know what you're thinking. How is this a sci-fi show? Or at least science fantasy, right? Well, hear me out first, please. Gargoyles follows a clan of ancient gargoyle warriors who were cursed to sleep as stone for 1,000 years before finally awakening in 90s New York City at night. Led by Goliath, they become protectors of the city while dealing with a lot of crazy villains. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. The range starts from petty criminals and corrupt businessmen to genetic experiments, robots, cybernetics, and enough madness to even make Batman proud. The reason why Gargoyles qualifies to be in this list is because it constantly leaned into science fiction concepts. They showed concepts of nanotechnology, cloning, cybernetic enhancements, you name it. They also depicted AI systems, time travel, advanced robotics, and one of the greatest manipulative geniuses in cartoon history, David Xanatos. Another tyrannical leader. This one was the CEO of Xanatos Enterprises. What a narc. A lot of Gargoyle fans will tell you that Xanatos alone elevated this show to another level. The man was always at least 10 steps ahead, and I'm talking about massive leap-like steps. Half the time, even when he lost, it somehow still felt like part of his plan. The internet literally named a trope after him called the Xanatos Gambit. He was the OG professor long before Money Heist was even conceived. But I feel the biggest reason Gargoyles stood out, unlike the other shows in this list, was the writing. This show trusted kids to follow long story arcs and morally layered characters and conflicts. It had what you'd call Shakespearean energy running through its veins. I'm not making things up. The creators admitted to openly pulling inspiration from classic tragedies and mythology. And can we talk about the fabulous voice cast for a second here? The legendary Keith David as Goliath was absolute perfection. Add Star Trek legends like Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis into the mix, and suddenly this cartoon felt weirdly prestigious. Even now, Gargoyles has one of the most loyal cult fan bases in animation history. People are still begging Disney for a proper revival, and they absolutely deserve one. The Real Adventures of Jonny Quest, 1996 to 1997. Time to talk about my absolute favorite cartoon of all time. I literally used to jump out of my school bus just so that I didn't miss the reruns of this masterpiece of a show. A lot of people remember the original Jonny Quest from the 60s, but The Real Adventures of Jonny Quest was the version that looked at kids and basically said, hey, what if we made this way more intense? Yep, this was the reboot, and it followed our favorite characters, Johnny, Haji, Jesse, and Dr. Benton Quest, as they traveled around the world dealing with high-tech villains, secret conspiracies, virtual reality experiments, and bizarre scientific threats. But unlike many 90s action cartoons, this show had a surprisingly grounded tone underneath all the sci-fi spectacle. Now, obviously, the thing everybody remembers is Quest World, the CGI virtual reality dimension that looked absolutely mind-blowing in 1996. Sure, today the computer animation looks hilariously dated in places, but back then, this felt futuristic as hell. We as kids genuinely thought this was what the internet was gonna become. However, beneath all the flashy visuals, the show actually explored some pretty heavy themes, I'm not gonna lie. There were episodes touching on environmental destruction, corporate greed, and even psychological manipulation. Dr. Zen especially felt less like a goofy cartoon villain and more like an actual threat. Another factor was very important to the cult favorite reputation it slowly built later on, and that is the amazing atmosphere which carried the show completely. Everything felt dangerous. Not too much, but definitely a little. The adventures had tension, the villains were intimidating, and the world itself felt believable enough that you could imagine these missions actually happening. Sadly, the series never became the giant hit Cartoon Network probably hoped for, but over time, it developed a really passionate cult following. A lot of people who revisit it today are shocked by how mature and ambitious it actually was for a mid-90s cartoon. Silverhawks, 1986. Boy, we're really getting into darker zones now, so let's get back to something light. To make Silverhawks, you need a couple of important ingredients. First, you require 2 cups full of space adventure, a cup of cyborgs, a few tablespoons of laser battles, and a shit ton of pure 80s glam metal energy together. There you have it, 1 plate of hot Silverhawks ready to serve. The show takes place in the galaxy of Limbo and follows a team of cybernetically enhanced law enforcers known as, well, the Silverhawks, duh, as they battle the mob boss Monstar and his gang of bizarre space criminals. And yes, of course, they were partly metal, partly real, which somehow became one of the coolest descriptions ever invented. Silverhawks became memorable because of its style. Everything looked insanely colorful and futuristic, even by 80s standards. The chrome armor designs, neon space backgrounds, and synth-heavy soundtrack made the whole thing feel like Cyberpunk 1986. This series also came from the same people behind the Thundercats, so you can immediately recognize the animation style and character designs. But unlike Thundercats, Silverhawks fully leaned into science fiction. And honestly, Monstar was a pretty terrifying villain for kids back then. The dude transformed from crime boss into literal armored monster whenever the Moonstar of Limbo answered his call. You know the call? That is such an aggressively 80s concept, and I absolutely love it. Now, sure, the show didn't become as gigantic as Transformers or TMNT, but people who grew up with Silverhawks remember it very fondly. Mostly because it had this weirdly cool identity that nobody else really copied properly afterward. Plus, I'm sorry, but that theme song alone earns this show a spot on the list. Hit it. Centurions, 1986. If you were like me in the 80s, and by me, I mean a nerdy goofy kid who had a few friends, there's a good chance you saw Centurions and immediately wanted your own assault weapon system attached to your body. No? That was only me then? Anyway, the premise of this show was pure glorious sci-fi nonsense in the best way possible. I'll try to explain in a simple manner. We see 3 operatives, Max Ray, Jake Rockwell, and Ace McCloud, battling the evil cyborg scientist Doc Terror, using modular exosuits that were literally beamed onto their bodies from an orbiting space station. The first guy specialized in underwater combat, the second in heavy weapons, and the third handled aerial combat. And every single time those suits locked into place, I used to jump so hard on my grandpa's couch that he literally banished me from ever touching it. The coolest part was unarguably the armor system. Depending on the mission, the Centurions could swap weapons and attachments almost like customizable sci-fi loadouts in modern RPG video games. Looking back now, the concept was way ahead of its time. The series also leaned hard into futuristic military tech, sci-fi engineering, orbital systems, AI threats, cybernetics, and advanced weapon concepts. And Doc Terror was a fantastic 80s villain. The man literally wanted to mechanize humanity and looked like he was built inside a radioactive blender. Sure, the show existed mainly to sell toys, which worked very well on me, but like many great 80s cartoons, the creators still gave it style and imagination. The action felt huge, the technology looked cool as hell, and the world had enough detail to make kids genuinely obsessed with it. Also, I'm sorry, but yelling "Power Extreme" never stopped being cool. In fact, I'm gonna scream now! Galaxy Rangers, 1986 to 1999. Now this right here is one of the most underrated space westerns ever made. Seriously, the adventures of the Galaxy Rangers deserved way more attention than it got. I mean, 4 space law enforcers protecting the frontier of the galaxy against the evil Crown Empire? That sounds like a pretty straightforward setup, right? But you know what separates Galaxy Rangers from other cartoons? I feel it's the fusion of classic western vibes with hardcore sci-fi concepts that takes the cake. And honestly, the tone could get pretty dark as well. One of the Rangers, Zachary Fox, spends a huge portion of the series desperately trying to rescue his wife after she's captured and psychologically manipulated by the villains. That ongoing emotional storyline alone gave the show a lot of depth. The animation quality also stood out immediately because the series was animated by TMS Entertainment in Japan, which meant the action looked smoother and more cinematic than a lot of American cartoons airing at the time. The biggest strength of Galaxy Rangers was probably its atmosphere. It genuinely felt like a frontier in space. There was loneliness, danger, political tension, and this constant feeling that civilization was barely holding itself together at the edges of the galaxy. Sadly, the show never got the massive franchise treatment that Transformers or TMNT received. But among cult animation fans, Galaxy Rangers still has a fiercely loyal following, and honestly, it deserves it. And that's it for today, guys. There was your full tour through 10 sci-fi cartoons that quietly broke our tiny kid brains in the best way possible. If even one of these shows just unlocked a buried memory, then my job here is done. If you enjoyed this trip back to the analog future, do me a favor and just hit like. Drop a comment with the one show you think absolutely had to be on this list, and tell us which cartoon turned you into a lifelong sci-fi addict. And of course, if you want more deep dives into the stuff you grew up with, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on so you don't miss what's coming next. See you in the next one.